Good afternoon. This is a webinar on optimizing the colleague ERP from assessment to implementation. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mark Tuck. I'm Director of Professional Services at Forelli. I've been involved in the colleague ecosphere for about 25 years. Everything from implementation of the product to modernization and kind of everything in between. Just a little bit about Forelli. I think we hear sometimes, people get to know us in a certain way and they don't realize we do other things. A lot of folks on my team are involved in project work, but we also have folks who are dealing with infrastructure, interim staffing, security, and kind of everything else you can imagine around the higher ed technology world. We like to think we're a different kind of technology service provider. We really do take a holistic approach. We want to understand how the tools you're using impact your actual work and what's the best fit for what you're trying to accomplish. We are independent. We're not here to sell you a particular system. While there are those of us who have some expertise in particular environments, we have other folks on the team who can deal with whatever you may have ahead of you. And we're always there for you. We have an 800 number. Somebody's there to answer, an actual person, 24 hours a day. And so when something comes up and you need our help, we're here to help you out. And satisfaction guaranteed. We want you to believe that you received value out of the engagement you participated in. And if you don't feel like that happened, we're going to return your money. We do our best when we know you best. A huge part of what we do is build a relationship with you. That helps us understand your objectives. It helps us understand your institution's values, what's important, what's not, and how can a solution best fit you. And we always want to help you deliver more, help your students succeed, help you ensure that you're financially stable, and tools are just part of the way to get you there. And again, we stand by our work. And if you're not happy with it, you let us know and we'll take care of it. So today we're talking about optimization in the colleague environment. So what does that mean? It could mean improving infrastructure, reducing labor, maximizing the tools you have at hand. Maybe most importantly, aligning your process with tools so that your objectives can actually be met by the tools you have, and that you can use the tools you have as effectively as possible to make those things happen, and that people aren't having to do work that's unnecessary to actually do that. And then ultimately to make your systems healthy and sustainable. And sometimes, what are you trying to achieve by doing an optimization project? You might be wanting to modernize your database. In the context of this webinar, we're going to be talking about this in relation to a SQL migration. But that may be one possibility. You may have overwrought processes, too much labor involved, too complicated to do, maybe particularly in a remote environment. Reporting is difficult or inconsistent. You ask what enrollment is right now and you get 3 different answers. Too much customization. Having spent many, many years helping clients do custom, I've now spent the last number of years helping them remove them. Really utilizing developments in the environment, new application setups to remove some of the customizations that we built over the last 2 decades. And it may be all of these, but there needs to be some impetus, some motivation to go through an effort of this size. So within the SQL migration sort of take on this, you Typically, clients are wanting to get from Unity to SQL. That may be the impetus. It may be to reduce the custom footprint, and the SQL migration is simply the lever to get that done. To reduce labor, and I don't mean by people, I mean the kind of manual labor that it takes to actually manage a system. So people coming in and spending the first couple of hours of the day running processes so that they can do the rest of the work during the day. What if you could save those 2 hours on a whole bunch of people's desktops so that they could spend more time working with students or getting reports done or doing some other strategically valuable activities. Improve reporting, just up and down the chain, whether it's your data is not great, whether you've gone through a lot of evolutions in terms of how you've managed the system and how you've managed programs or finances, and your data doesn't reflect that, or the tools you have aren't really consistent with modern reporting techniques. And then there's just the tools you have. Are you able to get the most out of what you actually own? So our process, optimally, is to really get an understanding of your environment. And we do that through an assessment process. We're going to talk about that in some detail. That assessment leads into the ability to develop a plan with you to try and then execute that optimization program. So from the assessment, we get to learn the details of your technical infrastructure, how your processes work. What are the systemic issues that are going on at your institution that are preventing you from getting where you want to be? Above and beyond the ERP or the SQL migration, we do assessments all across the environments. And any one of these could be seen as an optimization project of its own, but it may be how you do particular sets of processing. Maybe it's around how you hire people or how you do payroll processing. Maybe it's around getting to the self-service environment. We do operational assessments, particular offices, whether they're functional or IT, reporting strategy and deployment, just as a standalone. How's reporting working at your site? What are the more current options available to you? How could you actually roll something like that out? And then in relation to a SQL migration, we'd be talking about an ERP optimization assessment, which would really look like what's happening across the institution in relation to your ERP, whether it's third-party systems, your business processes, your policies, your IT infrastructure and support services. And how is all of that coming together to, one, help you make this move, but also to get the most out of what you have? So what's in the assessment? What do we do to get there? First and foremost, requirements gathering. What are you trying to do? What kind of materials can we gather to do that? And then combined with an interview-based approach, putting all that information together to really understand what's happening. We do a system review, what's going on in the infrastructure, what's going on in colleague, how are things set up, what are the kinds of data issues we're seeing. That leads to a recommendations report, and we typically deliver 2 versions, a draft and final, and we'll get into that in a minute, along with a presentation of our findings. So before we ever show up and start talking to you during interviews, we do a pre-engagement review where we ask you for a whole bunch of materials. This helps us to understand and give context to the interviews we do so that we're not coming in cold and thinking you're like everybody else and have the same issues as everyone else. This gives us an understanding of who reports to who, what's the organization of the institution, what are the dynamics, what kinds of money is being spent to do this work. In terms of things like audit findings, are there regulatory issues that you're trying to resolve while we're at it? Any number of times we've run into issues where there's been an issue around financial aid, and that becomes part of the overall engagement, resolving those kind of problems. Additionally, desk manuals, procedures, policies. What's your board policy book look like? What are the kinds of things that are in place that sort of serve as a framework for where you want to go? And finally, we get to the part where we actually ask questions. And so the assessment itself is really driven by interviews. So we have all this information, we have some context, and then we have a whole series of questions for you. Occasionally, these are one-on-one interviews. Sometimes there are stakeholder groups that may be cross-functional. And this is an area where we're trying to understand what works really well here, what doesn't work so well here, what are your pain points. You know, and for most folks, that's within their own universe of work. You know, if I'm in the registrar's office and it's really difficult to put together a schedule, you know, that's about that. But occasionally what we'll start to see over the course of the interviews is a series of sort of systemic issues, pieces of gaps in functionality that thread through almost all the areas. Maybe it's training, maybe it's a lack of documentation, whatever that may be. But it's also where we can understand your policy and process objectives, really get an understanding of your business process. What are the kinds of things that drive you as an institution? And then the use and purpose of customizations. One of the more current high-level objectives of almost all these optimization projects has been a decustomization effort, trying to reduce the customizations, reduce the footprint against software delivery so that you can keep up with these quarterly updates, so that you can move forward on self-service, so that it doesn't take so much overhead to get a software update installed. We take all that information and we go off and we start doing some analysis, and we try to understand and put together from our notes and from the information that's been provided to us what's really going on. And some of that may be very specific. Here's what's going on with scheduling, and these are some underlying issues related to that, or here are the topical knowledge gaps that are preventing that from moving forward. We organize that by key findings, both by area and sort of overall. We're looking at systemic and cross-functional issues. What are the same things that are impacting every area or a large number of areas across the institution? Or your students or your faculty? What are the kinds of things that impede them? We do some code and data analysis to support our findings. So we're looking at, what's going on in colleague, what kinds of data can we see? What are some things that we see that don't appear to be best practice? And are we really seeing that in real life? And then we develop a set of recommendations around that. Then we come back with the results. Those results include opportunities to realign process, custom code that could be eliminated, data transformations that may be necessary. In some cases, 10 years ago, you were running some programs that you're no longer running, but the setups for those programs are making things more difficult now. Technical improvements that may be possible, downtime on your system, the way backups are completed, any number of things, with the intention of reducing or eliminating the pain points for you, and to set up a recommendations roadmap. What are the short, medium, and long-term things you could do to get the most out of your system and to make your processes work better there? So we do a couple things. Once the assessment's been written, we produce a draft that goes to the assessment sponsors. They have an opportunity to provide revisions or updates, clarifications about how something was addressed. Once we have that and those updates have been made, we present and provide a final report to the stakeholders. Typically, the group of folks who were interviewed get to hear sort of from us what we saw and how that's meaningful to them. What are the next steps? what should this look like going forward? What are the opportunities available to you? Depending on the project and the institution, we may do another presentation to leadership that gives context at a strategic level about what this kind of optimization project could do, what the cost looks like, what are the resource requirements. When everybody's in agreement about moving forward, the next step is develop a plan. And this slide essentially represents our optimization framework from the organization stage, where we're actually building a project plan and the governance around it, through the build out of the new environments, the technical work, the testing, and all of the labor that goes into making the new version of your ERP a reality. And I'm going to talk about these in more detail. So first out of the gate is obviously putting together a plan. We work with you to identify the scope. What's the scope of the actual work we're going to accomplish? It takes a lot of resources to do these projects, and occasionally you can't do everything. And so there's, some narrowing of a scope. And sometimes it's, let's get everything covered and ensure that everybody gets everything out. Organizing a project, putting together the teams of people who are going to do this work, what their role is, and how they communicate with one another. Super essential to the success of one of these projects. And having that plan up front is really important. What should leadership hear on a regular basis? What do they need to approve? What are what are project managers authorized to decide, or key stakeholders, and ensuring that all of that's communicated on a regular basis so everybody knows what's going on. And then finally, setting up the definition of success. What does the end of this project being successful look like? Is it simply getting to SQL, as the case may be, or is it a particular amount of customization has to be eliminated for this to be successful? Or we need to be able to take on these new programs without additional labor. Any one of these can be part of that definition, but having a sense of what that is so that when you get there, you actually know you did it. A really key aspect of our process are the business process reviews. There is no doubt that change is really, really difficult. When you've been doing something for a long time, and you know how to do it, and you know what you're going to get out of it, it's really difficult to say, okay, pull back, just shake the box and see what comes out the other side. And so, back to that relationships at the heart of what we do. Part of what we're trying to do here is empower people to feel as if they have a real stake in the outcome, and they can really make important contributions to this process. So, really doing a deep dive in their process and really helping to develop an understanding and a trust that we're not out to get them, we're out to make it better. And whatever we can do to do that. So, the identification of gaps and pain points and trying to resolve those, and sometimes in real time. We don't put everything off to the end. Not every win has to wait 6 months or a year. Some things can happen right away. And where those exist, we take those opportunities. But really try to get down into the weeds of, why do you have a customization? What's it doing for you? And talking about what are the other possibilities of achieving that same thing without the custom, or using some tools that maybe people aren't even aware exist now. One issue we run into on a fairly regular basis is people don't know that there's some new function out there that will actually accomplish what they want to do within the product. The other thing that comes out of these are a lot of different documents. One is technical and procedural documentation. So a real clarity about this is what our new process is going to look like, and this is what we have to do to do it, which may involve technical specifications, reporting specifications, process changes, and what do we need to do differently? Do different people need to be involved in this than were before for us to get what we need out of it? Do we need to change the data that's in the system to do this? Any number of times, a configuration change to make things work better will impact your data historically. And so we try to be very careful about what is the meaning of that change? Is that going to impact other reports? Does that impact your state reporting? What about institutional research? And engage all the people who know the outcomes or the potential pitfalls of those kind of changes so that everybody's on board when the change actually happens. Just some sample outcomes from those processes. We worked with a client who had a barrier to registration that required you to answer a question every single time you went in to do any kind of registration activity. And this was a holdover from a board 2 boards ago that nobody thought could actually go away. And this was really impeding them from moving forward with self-service because it required a customization in WebAdvisor. What we did was really break down, what are we trying to get out of this? This is what other institutions do to do that. And that involved any number of phone calls to their peers saying, how are you doing this? Which affirmed that that was the reality. And some operational changes about how students were going to deal with this thing that they used to have to answer for the very tiny number of people who really had to answer it. And then eliminating this customization, which also eliminated this barrier to a bunch of people enrolling when you really want them enrolling. Data cleanup. Client had a customization in their billing and invoicing programs that every time an invoice was produced, a user field was being updated with a whole bunch of different pieces of data to support their general ledger fee distributions. This was a holdover from literally the beginning of that client's experience on Colleague 20 years earlier. We were able to identify another way to do that without storing off some custom data in a field, which one, cleaned up the data, and two, ensured that they wouldn't have to keep generating this information for this GL distribution, that we could actually do the GL distribution without the stored off data. But, you know, we were updating about 20 million records and trying to also ensure that this didn't impact billing for any time over the last 20 years and in the current world, and that their fees actually distributed accurately. So a fairly small, innocuous data length issue became, you know, a 6-week mini project. The integration of siloed operations, really getting people to talk to each other about how their processes impact one another. We had a client where the registrar's office didn't really talk with their student finance people. And so they were literally emailing a spreadsheet back and forth of students who had dropped or withdrawn in order to process refunds. When getting in a room for a couple of hours and really knocking through how to configure the setups for registration could automate all the refunding processes and got everybody on the same page, built a little trust between the units that could carry forward. Like I said earlier, custom code reduction. The last couple of large projects we've worked on, we reduced custom code in the neighborhood of 75 to 80%. Some of that is obsolete code that's just simply being removed. Others are being disentangled so that they can go to delivered processes. And in every opportunity, we try to find ways to save time for individuals and for units and the institution as a whole. Things that could be scheduled so that they don't have to be run in real time and take up system resources during the day when students are trying to register or you're trying to do other things. So setups of, you know, nighttime jobs that'll take work off people's desks they can do other things. In terms of technical optimization, obviously, if you're in the midst of a SQL migration, you're typically buying new infrastructure. You're looking at improvements to system maintenance procedures to run the new environment. The migration to SQL itself, which gets you to a more modern and more market-friendly database environment. Code decustomization has a huge impact on custom impact and software updates, which should help keep you more current so that you can install the latest and greatest in your development and test accounts and keep moving forward and keeping up with the maintenance windows that we now have. Data cleanup and transformation makes reports better. It makes self-service work better because you have less errors. It makes your data cleaner. And then coming up with a reporting strategy and development, huge possibilities there. I'm going to get into all these a little bit more. So in terms of infrastructure management, one thing you need to keep in mind is that you'll need good specifications and the procurement of new equipment and software. Whether you're going to remain on-premise or you're looking at a cloud solution, you'll need to think about the timelines for getting this squared away in relation to this kind of project, because this is typically necessary as part of one of these engagements. How are you going to manage the new SQL environment? What's it look like to manage code there, to move code there? When are you doing that? When we're making updates to custom code that will move forward, where is that happening? Who's responsible for it? How are we ensuring that we keep the most current versions ready to go for the new world? The managing of computed columns in the SQL environment is a huge deal. First off, getting the ones you're going to keep over there, but then maintaining and promoting them amongst the new SQL environments is a bit of a trick. And that's part of what we're trying to make sure happens effectively in your new world. And meanwhile, keeping your current systems running. You can't stop the current world while the new one's being built. And so these are all aspects of things that need to be considered as you move forward. In terms of custom code cleanup, out of those business process reviews, there's information coming about these are the kinds of things that can be taken out. These are the kinds of things that can be updated. Here are the kind of updates we'd want to make. We always have as a goal to try and eliminate custom against delivered software. That reduces your custom impact. It makes software installs easier. Bolt-ons tend to be a slightly different flavor, and we just try to adjust them in terms of, is this functionality that really exists in the delivered environment and you're replicating it for no reason, or for reasons that are pretty marginal. This may include integration redesign. Occasionally, the integrations are built on tools that really aren't viable in the SQL environment, or they simply need to be updated, or there are now partner integration tools that weren't available when you originally got a third-party product that are now available and could be implemented. And this is an opportunity to do that. We talked about obsolete and unnecessary code, updates to make things SQL compliant. Obviously, code that won't work in SQL has to be removed or replaced. And one of the other things we do, and this goes towards the obsoleting effort, is we try to identify the computed columns that are in use. So things that are used in list specs, things that are used in rules, things that are used in your communications management, other setups, and try to eliminate the computed columns that wouldn't really be viable in a SQL environment or unnecessary in a SQL environment. So all the last name fields that got promulgated across all the files because you needed them when you were doing colon prompt and query builder setups, that aren't necessary in a SQL environment or with SQL tools. And so frequently, we're looking at 2,000 to 3,000 computed columns becoming something more like 300 to 500 computed columns. to ensure that your historical setups and anything you have in progress can be maintained properly and not break. And then trying to limit that going forward. How do you prevent that from just building back up? And then the other piece is the use of the process handler. You really do have an opportunity here to use the process handler to replace things that used to be done in cron and little custom scripts. Some outcomes of projects we've done previously. We just wrapped up a project this last spring where we eliminated about 90% of computed columns, about 80% of custom code. I think we ended up with one piece of customization against delivered code at the end of that project from maybe 40. A smaller custom footprint overall. In the new environment, the only things you'll have there are the things that you bring over. So all this sort of remainder stuff that was left there from years and years of development that eventually got put away stops being visible to you, which is just kind of like a nice spring cleaning. Less time to update software we've talked about, more transparency. In general, when we're trying to talk about decustomization projects, we tend to put up a number of barriers to entry. So what's the process by which you get a customization through to the other side, to that optimized environment? And what are the approvals? Who has to see it? And so part of that is some sort of justification that becomes a recommendation that then gets approved and then becomes part of an official inventory of this is the customizations we have now, which is now visible to everyone. So it's not that Bob over here can get everything he wants, but Sally can't. This is what we have, and this is why we have it. And there's clear reasoning behind it. And then, just as time goes by, a focus on the creative use of the delivered software, and maybe not even creative use, just most efficient use of it. We did a project like this a few years ago. We did discover something that was causing a lot of maintenance on an annual basis around financial aid. And there was a way to overcome it, but we couldn't overcome it within the time frame of the project. But the work that did get done during the project led the team to believe that, oh, we can accomplish that thing next. And so we came back after the project was over, maybe 6 months later, and helped them do this one standalone project that was now their goal. We need to get rid of these customizations. We want to get rid of that, all these computed columns we're building every year, and go to a setup that'll allow us to just have all of this work every year without maintenance. And we accomplished that over the course of a couple months for them. And now this huge build out they used to do every year so that their financial aid would work no longer needs to be done. So they save labor, they've reduced long-term customization development, and they're really thinking on a regular basis now about what are other things that we have set up specifically for us that could actually be done through the software. In terms of data cleanup, we'll run the regular data scanners that identifies key issues, data length issues, data formatting issues, dates, numbers that are out of range, those kinds of things, and proceed on a data cleanup endeavor for that. Additionally, from either business process reviews or, like I mentioned on that invoice project, one of these issues may result in seeing something more broadly happening, where either a business process is causing some kind of contextual data cleanup, where the way we did this has caused this data to be pretty messy, and we clean it up so that it aligns more properly and the way it should have happened if the process had been done the same way the whole time. So there's those kinds of things. In terms of utilities versus manual updates, if we see high volume or very complex data cleanups, for instance, a key is too long and now that key is sitting in a lot of files, we'll write a custom utility to clean it up. Others may require simply just manual updates by staff. And, part of that is keeping all of your users in the loop. If we're cleaning up transcript data, we want the registrar and record staff to be aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it. One, so that we're in line with how things operate and we're not going to break something by accident. But also so that if something does come up, they can come back and talk to us about whether something we were doing in the data cleanup might have caused that result. And then the other piece is finding the source of this data. Occasionally we'll find things in user fields or wherever that just looks strange. And if we can see that it's still being updated, part of what we do is try to find where it's coming from. Because if we clean it up and that source is still populating it, we're going to be cleaning it up over and over again, and we want to do it once. So occasionally we're backtracking, identifying the source, which may be an integration, it may be a custom screen, could be anything. We identify the source, either stop it or identify that it has stopped, or make a fix so that it won't keep building this bad data, and then do the cleanup so that it's all taken care of at once. Just some example outcomes. Phone numbers have been troublesome for the last 20 years as far as I'm concerned. Different integrations have caused phone number formatting issues, occasionally keystroke issues. WebAdvisor had its own little problems. So sometimes it's just phone number formats. Sometimes it's that phone numbers were set up in addresses originally, and now you're using person, but not all the phone numbers came over to person. And you want them all in the same place so that your reporting is more consistent. So getting that all cleaned up. The use of user fields, we've all used them. We love them. But sometimes we store things in them that are really long, or we store multi-value data in a single value field. Getting those cleaned up and either eliminated, moved to a place where they can continue to exist for reporting purposes or operational purposes, or finding another way to do that work. Data transformation, we had a client that had 16 academic levels in their history, and to move forward and have things be more clean and clear, they wanted to consolidate 8 of them into a single value. And for those of you who know student records, a lot of things include the academic level. And so we had to collapse that information and ensure that we were, one, not breaking records all across the system, but also that GPAs weren't being changed, that cumulative credits weren't being changed, the transcripts would still run. So that's part of what may have come out of one of those business process reviews. And in that case, we were able to get that done for about 50,000 records and make what they're doing going forward cleaner without breaking their historical record. And then finally, custom data, whether it's ensuring that we bring it over so that you have that historical data, or consolidating it in some way so that you don't have so much of it. That's all just part of the process. Reporting strategy. A move to SQL gives you a huge opportunity and also presents some challenges. If you're in an environment where you still have access to the colon prompt or doing query builder, those strategies have to stop and you have to look at new tools. There are some tools that can make the migration, but a lot of clients use that as a chance to really think about what's the most current version of the reporting world they'd like to be in. Is it using SSRS? Is it using a data warehouse now? Will they continue to use ODS and CROA or Informer? Any number of possibilities. Are they going to move to Power BI? And what does it take to make those changes? Part of that is looking at the data sources, what tools are available and affordable, Who does the report development now, and what should that transition look like? Should the same people be doing it? Is it going to become more decentralized? What are all those, what's all the context around this? And helping you develop a strategy that makes sense for your institution, and that will, from a technology perspective, put you on the right path to stay solid going forward. And then ultimately working through training. What are you going to need to do differently in this environment than you did before to get at least as good of results? And part of that in a major reporting strategy change, like restructuring, may be identifying what are the critical reports that we need to ensure they're on day one, and know that we're going to continue to build out that new reporting development as time goes by. So once you have your business process reviews, you have what that new model is going to be. You have technical work to clean up the data. You have custom code redevelopment. You have your new infrastructure in place. Your data gets moved. Now that it's clean, it can be moved. And now it's time to test that model out. Develop test scripts. Ensure that you have not only all of your odd processes, but all your very standard processes. What is it that 80% of the people do all day long, and do those things work the same way? Looking at your business processes, the newly realigned business processes working in this environment with the data you have, with that transformed data, can you still do the same things or get the results you're looking for? We conduct unit and integrated testing on, through multiple rounds. So it's an iterative process. Within your own unit, are you able to, do your registration, drop a student, add a student, do the repeat rules work, et cetera. In an integrated testing environment, from admission through becoming a student, through billing, through financial aid, through graduation, do all those works, and can we get everybody in a room or a Zoom room together to do that testing together, so that, hey, I need to rebuild this. I need to see what's going on with this refund. Can you register that student or drop them or withdraw them, so that we can make sure that everything's working the way it should. Collecting that information. There's always things that don't work. And so we go back and make tweaks and fixes and ensure that the next iteration will work better, or will resolve the issue entirely. And then start communicating the changes in that model out. This is how this is going to be different. This is what you need to know. Here's some impacts of this change. On the help desk, who may be answering questions about something a student's experiencing in WebAdvisor or self-service. And then, including that reporting strategy and development in this process. So now that I can register students here, what do the reports look like? Can I see my enrollment statistics in this new reporting environment? And finally, once all of that is done, the opportunity to go live. So, prior to going live, we build out a plan specifically for the live. What are all the steps required before, during, and after to make that successful? Part of that is communication. The system's going to be down for a while you do this work. What's involved? What do you need to know? When can you expect it to be back? What are the things you should plan ahead for? Are there classes you want to take that you may miss a window during that 5 days of downtime? What are the entire sequence of events and who owns them during the course of the time you're going live? Who's running each process? Who's verifying it? Who's coming in for testing? When are they coming in? And finally, everybody getting together during that window and signing off on the new environment. The data's there, reports work, integrations are operable, I can register, self-service is up, all of those things, and turning the switch on and cutting everything back over. New links for accessing the system, whatever the case may be, and ensuring that the public is aware that they can get back in now. And finally, when all goes well, we celebrate. So in terms of outcomes, you know, you are trying to optimize. You know, you're moving to a modern infrastructure where the tools are current for this environment. You're able to use them in the most effective way possible. They're documented. People know now how registration is going to work, how payments will work, how payment plans can be set up, how budget transfers can occur, all of that. And that information can be shared institutionally. Significant customization reductions and the overhead that goes along with it, that expectation was met. That you've gotten reporting improvements or an effective reporting structure for this environment, and that you know you have a place to start from and can continue to build on. And then finally, and this is definitely not least, is that instead of the way we operated for about 20 years through, you know, hey, we need this thing, let's build it. Staff now focus on how to keep making what we have better. What are the new tools coming in the software update? How could we utilize them? How could we take advantage of them? What's something else we could do now that we have a little bit of bandwidth to spend some time on that, rather than jumping to the, hey, let's do another custom piece over here to make that work for us. Questions?
Feel free to write in the chat or to take yourself off mute if you do have any questions.
Hi, hey, I have a question. This is Len Lipkin from the University of the Arts. We're in the process of moving to, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, we're in the process of moving our colleague to the cloud, but we're not doing the SQL migration yet. So the next step, we just needed the cloud for disaster recovery purposes, essentially. I guess if once we're on the cloud with our existing infrastructure and we would want to go down a path like this, what should we expect the level of Ellucian involvement need to be for an engagement like this?
You'll definitely have involvement because of things like, one, integrations, but another because of code fixes that you'll need to get installed through their process. So the planning will need to revolve around how you can, you know, your timing essentially, how you're going to cycle updates through the build out of clones. In terms of environment setup for the SQL side, I'm not quite certain of their requirements for you around that.
Yeah, well, I assume they manage the cloud. They manage
Right.
the cloud environment,
Right.
so I assume we'd need them at least for that
yes,
portion.
Yes.
But
okay. Right, but they also do your code promotion, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
We're not actually there yet, so
okay.
But that's my understanding.
Yeah, from my experience, that would be accurate. And so, you know, I think, you know, as part of this kind of project on that framework, you would definitely want them engaged in the conversation on a regular basis. So they understand, one, timelines, and this is not, I don't think, super unusual for them. Timelines, you know, getting some good understanding of when you're going to start doing, you know, development work in a pretty heavy duty way. And then also negotiating out some of the questions around, you know, what you may have going on with some of the integrations and changes you want to make there.
And not to be a pain in the neck, I have a follow-up question. Because
Okay.
I know when I bring this up with my account exec, I can already hear his voice in my ear saying, well, why don't you let Ellucian do this work
Yeah.
for you? And
Sure.
and what would be your answer to that?
You know, I think from my perspective, what we bring to the table is, you know, we're not trying to build you out the same way as we've done with every other client. I think our framework is similar, but we really try to tailor your result to you. You know, we want you to get the most advantage as you can out of all the different pieces. And, you know, we understand there's going to be some limitations because of that, because of who's doing what. But I think it's really about, we try to really understand, and part of it's that assessment process, and part of it's the business process reviews, which I think we just do better than anyone. You know, how should this environment look for you on the other side from a business process and, you know, technical perspective, and really tailor that to your environment and to your culture.
Thank you.
Sure.
I suspect you're probably cheaper than Ellucian too.
Well, I don't know.
I haven't asked for a quote, but anyway,
Okay.
I'll stop monopolizing. Let someone else ask a question.
No worries. Anyone else?
Lynn, yeah, any other questions? Okay, if not, you can always reach us at info@forelli.com. Feel free to email us with any questions or any suggestions you may have for upcoming webinar topics. And you can always check into forelli.com/what-new, what's new, and that will let you know exactly what we have coming up. I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. We will hang on the line if anyone has any additional questions. Thanks, guys.